Chapter 7 21st of March Bucha. Maria and Alina felt themselves a lot safer while staying at Georgi's house. It was rare for Russian soldiers to show up there. Most times they were only passing along the road some distance away from the house. And yet, Maria felt exceedingly worried as their situation was uncertain. And after seeing the horrors the enemy did to her husband and neighbors, she couldn't get her nerves under control and kept having persistent nightmares. Early morning came, and Maria was ready to go and prepare breakfast for everyone. It was still 5:30 in the morning, but she and her daughter were up already. Georgi was also up, fixing a few things in his house. Maria glanced out of the window as she often did, constantly looking out for danger. As though her fears came back to haunt her, she spotted two Russian soldiers approaching the house from afar. They were coming here, and this was unmistakable. Her heartbeat accelerated, and her hands went cold. Then she looked a bit closer and recognized one of the soldiers. It was the same one who murdered her husband. "Georgi, soldiers are coming," she alerted him. "That's strange of them to come," Georgi wondered. "They usually expect me to be there to do the digging at 7 a.m. It's still too early." "Maybe they found something out. Maybe this is regarding those two men that tried to rape me. My daughter and I need to hide. I recognize one of the soldiers." "Alright, just go over to that storage room over there," Georgi pointed with his finger. "And close the door. You should be safe there. I'll try to find out what they want." Maria felt panic taking over, and she began to fear for her own and her daughter's lives once again. That horrible feeling came back, even though it was subsiding over the last few days. She realized that perhaps a sense of terror would never truly leave her alone until her dying breath. Both Maria and Alina rushed into the storage room, closing the door behind themselves. Maria sat down. Her breathing was fast and heavy. Alina came closer to her and hugged her. She could see how worried her mother was. Maria hugged her back and didn't want to let go of her daughter, afraid that something might happen to them both. A knock on the front door then came. Maria stopped breathing so hard and listened in. She could hear Georgi opening the door and greeting the soldiers. She got up and walked closer to the door so that she could better hear what was being said. "We've been tasked to collect some food and need to see what you have," one of the soldiers said. "You are free to look, but I don't have much," Georgi answered to their request. "You must have plenty of canned food. Where do you keep it?" "In the kitchen." Maria then heard footsteps. The kitchen was directly next to the storage room where she and Alina were hiding. She could hear the soldiers even more clearly now, but couldn't see what was going on. Most of the sounds were those of small objects being moved around with impatience. "Is that all of it?" one of the soldiers asked after sifting through a cabinet. "Yes." "Fine, that will do." Maria took a small step back from the door, causing a floorboard beneath her to audibly creak. She froze in place, hoping nobody heard that. "Who is in that room?" one of the soldiers questioned. It's Georgi began, but he was stopped by the soldiers as their footsteps were now approaching closer. Maria felt terrified, but quickly composed herself. She knelt down and began pretending that she's looking for something in the nearby boxes. The storage room door was sharply opened by one of the soldiers, who then peered inside. Maria got up on her feet and turned towards him, seeing the face of a man who was responsible for killing her husband. She tried her best to withhold her emotions so not to cause any changes in her facial expression. "Sorry," Georgi quickly began, thinking of an excuse. "My daughter has been helping me around the house." Have I not seen you somewhere before?" the soldier said suspiciously. The other soldier also came closer. He was shorter in height. They both stood in the doorway, looking inside. I don't think so," Maria murmured quietly whilst looking down at the floor. "I swear I saw you living a few streets down from here. I remember your daughter too. In fact, that idiot Pasternak kept talking about you non-stop, saying what he wanted to do to you. And he's dead now, which raises questions. I'd like you to come with us." A scorching feeling of fear appeared in her stomach and began to pierce her every organ. She didn't know what to do. She didn't want to be taken away by them. They would likely torture her, rape her, and then kill her. At that moment, Maria saw Georgi taking a swing with a crowbar and striking the shorter of the two soldiers to the back of the head with great force. The strike brought the soldier down in less than a second, but this alerted the taller soldier who was questioning Maria. "You fucking bastard!" the tall soldier yelled as he turned around and saw what happened. Georgi swung the crowbar again, this time towards the second soldier. The soldier attempted to dodge the strike, although it landed on his shoulder with the curved end of the crowbar. He grunted from pain, but brought his rifle up regardless to aim at Georgi. Georgi tried to push the soldier over, but the soldier overpowered him and began pushing him the other way, towards the kitchen. The two of them fell down, locked together, with the soldier on top. The end of the crowbar was still jammed in the shoulder of the Russian soldier, but the strength had not left him. Georgi was trying to push the crowbar deeper into him, but his enemy was too strong. He aimed his rifle right at Georgi's stomach and shot several rounds at point-blank range. Each shot that was fired made Maria and Alina jump in terror. Maria realized that she only had a couple of seconds to react before the soldier would attempt to attack her. She rushed into the kitchen out of pure survival instinct, grabbed the big knife that was on the kitchen table, and thrust it towards the soldier from behind. The knife entered deep into his back between the shoulder blades, causing the Russian soldier to drop his weapon and stop moving, with the only exception of an uncontrollable shake of his hands. A few seconds later, the enemy soldier collapsed onto the ground beside Georgi. Maria needed a few moments to catch her breath. Her heart was beating so forcefully that it felt like it was about to burst out of her chest. She could feel herself sweating, and her limbs were vibrating on accord of their own. "Mom?" Alina's voice came from the storage room. "It's okay, darling. Just stay there," Maria responded while still trying to catch her breath. She did not want her daughter to see this. Georgi was already dead. There was no more life in his eyes. He took a risk to save their lives and paid for it with his own. Maria's legs felt weak and she had to sit down on the floor. She couldn't gain control of her panic. Even though both Russian soldiers were dead, her whole body was still firing off a constant sense of alarm. She lay down on the floor in a fetal position and began to sob. She needed to let these emotions out, and it had to happen right now. Alina entered the kitchen and saw her mother crying on the floor. She ran to her mother's side and gently caressed her shoulder. "Mom, what's wrong? Did they hurt you? Mom, please." No, they didn't hurt me, my darling. Just give me a moment." Alina began crying too while seeing her mother like this. She lay down next to Maria and hugged her. The two of them continued laying together in a tight embrace for a couple of minutes. "We're going to have to leave this place, dear," Maria told her daughter when she finally managed to stop herself from crying. "It's unsafe for us. They will send more soldiers to see why these ones have not come back." "Okay, Mom, I understand. Let's gather everything that's useful and go. Make sure to put something warm on. It's still cold out there." Alina nodded in understanding as both of them got up from the floor. Without delay, they began filling a bag with food and other useful supplies for the road. Maria did not know where they would run, but they had to get out of this place. They had to get out of the occupied territory at all costs. 21st of March, outskirts of Kiev. Alexei regained his consciousness. There was dust everywhere, his mouth, his nose, his eyes. As he acquired strength in his limbs, he used his hands to brush the dust off his face so that he could open his eyes fully. His vision was blurred and his head was aching a fair bit. A thin ray of sunlight was coming through the open doorway up above through which he entered the cellar, but other than that, it was very dim inside. After applying some effort, Alexei lifted his heavy head and looked around, still trying to remember where he was. A few moments later, he remembered what happened and attempted to sit up. His head spun even more now, and he needed a handful of seconds to readjust his sense of balance. "How long have I been out? Is it morning already?" he asked himself. When he felt confident enough, he got onto his feet very carefully and looked all round the dimly lit cellar. Because a large part of the wooden stairs broke, he figured he wouldn't be able to go back out that way. There was another set of stairs here. That one was leading further into the building. Alexei wasted no time and headed up along the steps. To his relief, these were stone steps and he was sure they wouldn't collapse from under him. At the end of the stairs there was a door. He pushed it open without much trouble and was now inside a 2-story house. It appeared that the building was hit by one of the missiles from the day before. Parts of the ceiling were broken completely, and Alexei could see the sky through the large holes in it. Down below on the floor level, there was rubble scattered everywhere. The windows were all shattered and tiny pieces of glass were polluting the whole floor. The house appeared to have been abandoned. Its owners must have left it earlier on during the invasion, or perhaps even before it. A few objects of furniture were still there, but it was obvious that no one was at home for days. Or was that so? Alexei heard a gentle whimpering noise. It sounded like a dog. He looked towards the direction of the sound, but couldn't see anything. There was just rubble. He knelt down and gazed under it and saw a dog trapped under a handful of wooden beams and planks. He hastily grabbed the first couple of wooden beams and threw them aside, then another one, and another. Once he removed the bulk of the fallen debris, the dog squeezed itself out of the narrow gap. It was a German Shepherd breed and didn't seem to be fully grown yet, perhaps about a year or 2 of age. "Hey," Alexei stroked the dog gently as it came closer to him to show appreciation. "Were you just left here by yourself? Where are your owners?" The dog just sat down and gazed at him, its tongue hanging out. Alexei got up from the floor and turned in the direction of the front door. There was no point losing time. He needed to find Dmitro and the others. They were likely looking for him. As he approached the front door, the dog followed him. The door was locked. However, it could be opened from the inside without a key. Alexei unlocked it and opened it. The dog followed him out. "You want to come with me or something? What about your owners?" he asked. The dog continued looking at him, a friendly and affectionate expression on its face. "Okay, fine. You can come with me if you'd like. What should I call you? Is it okay if I call you Max? I always thought if I had a dog, that's the name I'd give it." He decided to get going. As he looked around, he noticed a few buildings were damaged that were fine the day before. The damage evidently happened due to yesterday's attack. Fresh bits of rubble were now lying beside the buildings. He wasn't sure where Dmitro could have been at that moment in time, but decided that it was best to head to the place where they parked their vehicles. At some point, either Dmitro or the other guys would return to the cars, so it seemed like a logical meeting point. As he walked further along the road, he saw Dmitro in the distance. It seemed he found his friend even sooner than he had expected. He hastened his step. Max was following close behind him. Dmitro turned in his direction and saw him as he got closer, a sense of relief appearing on his face. "Alexei, brother, where the hell have you been? And what happened to you?" "I tried to find a shelter yesterday when the shelling started," Alexei began explaining. "But then I fell down through some stairs and lost my senses. We've been looking for you all evening yesterday after the shelling stopped. Glad you're all right. I was worried you got buried under a rubble somewhere. Sorry to keep you worried." "And what's this? You've made a new friend?" Dmitro pointed at the dog. "That's Max. He was trapped under some rubble in the same house where I took shelter. Not sure where his owners are, but he seems to be following me around." "Huh, funny. Dogs always did love you. But anyway, let's return to the cars. We still need to deliver some of the supplies closer to the front line." Dmitro turned around and began walking back, with Alexei and Max following him. The moment Dmitro began walking, something caught Alexei's eye on the ground. "Dmitro, wait! Stop!" Alexei did not get a chance to finish warning his friend of what he saw when a small but very loud explosion occurred right where Dmitro stepped, violently knocking him to the side and onto the ground. It was one of the small unexploded bomblets that came from a cluster bomb. Dmitro accidentally stepped on it without noticing, and this prompted it to detonate. Now Dmitro was laying on the ground, clutching onto his leg and hoarsely screaming from pain. Smoke was everywhere at the site of the explosion. Alexei rushed to his friend's side, despite nearly getting knocked down by the shockwave of the explosion. Dmitro couldn't open his eyes. He was just writhing from an unbearable pain. His whole left leg was charred and burning, and Alexei could even see the boot was torn apart by the explosion. "Dmitro, stay with me!" he shouted to get his friend's attention. Dmitro desperately needed paramedics, but there was nobody around. Only a few civilians ran closer to observe what had happened. "We need some medics here, quickly!" Alexei yelled towards the group of people that began gathering. Some of the people immediately scurried to find some help. A couple of others hurriedly came closer to help keep Dmitro stable. "Don't you dare to give up, brother. The help will be here any moment now," Alexei kept saying. He knew Dmitro could hear him despite screaming from an enormous pain and still being unable to open his eyes. Alexei continued frantically looking around, hoping the help would get here soon. Every second was precious, and Dmitro's condition was critical. He could pass out at any moment if not helped in time. 22nd of March, somewhere near Kherson. Taras and Roman were sitting at a small wooden table and having their meal. It was dinner time, and the other prisoners were also in the canteen, having some food to keep themselves going through their ordeal. Taras was immersed in thoughts. He really missed his family. He wanted to see them again, or at least to hear their voices. He had not spoken to them since the day Kherson was taken and he was captured as a prisoner. They had no idea if he was still alive or not, and this was gnawing at him, making him feel restless. He did not want them to suffer emotionally. He wished he could at least send a message their way, just to tell them that he was still alive, to give them a peace of mind. His thoughts were interrupted by an unpleasant sound of something falling onto the floor. He and Roman looked in the direction of the sound and saw one of the Russian soldiers deliberately having dropped some food on the floor. "You there, pick it up!" the Russian soldier commanded one of the prisoners and pushed him onto the floor. "These bastards are making me sick," Roman commented quietly so only Taras could hear him. "Patience, friend. They'll regret everything. I promise you that." Both of them finished their meal, grabbed their rubbish and got up. They threw the rubbish in a nearby bin and then, without disturbing anyone and without making eye contact with any Russian soldier, they left the canteen and into the main hallway. Taras sat down on one of the seats where he could always see the whole hallway. He liked inspecting it for details. Roman was not far, walking around and looking for anything useful. They had to stay inconspicuous and not draw attention to themselves. Taras had been preparing to turn this place upside down and to free all the captives. But to do that, he needed to be aware of every important detail in the building and to really get to know the enemy soldiers and their habits. Unfortunately, some of the soldiers were swapped for new ones every now and again, and so he had to learn about the new ones from scratch. Despite that, the number of soldiers overseeing the prisoners was always the same. He counted that there had been exactly 12 Russian soldiers in the barracks at all times. Each one was armed with an assault rifle, but Taras suspected that most weren't well trained. The best soldiers wouldn't be tasked with the guard duty and instead would be sent fighting. He noticed that in the afternoon time, all 12 soldiers were out and about, but in the morning time, only 9 were. This suggested that the other 3 were most likely sleeping at that time, which could mean that they were the night shift soldiers, watching over the barracks when everyone else slept. So, for a successful breakout, nighttime was more ideal, when more soldiers were asleep. The trouble was that at night, all the prisoners were kept in their small room the entire time, and the door was locked. So if they wanted to break out at night, they needed a way to lure one of the night shift soldiers to open the door. "You two, over here!" Taras heard one of the Russian soldiers commanding. He diverted his gaze to check if the soldier was talking to him, and noticed that the soldier was facing the other way and talking to the only 2 female prisoners who had just exited the canteen. The soldier demanded for them to go and stand in another part of the main hallway, where 3 other Russian soldiers were standing. "Now, both of you, take your clothes off," the soldier demanded. "What?" "You heard me right. Strip down to your underwear." The 2 women had a despondent look on their faces, realizing they were about to be humiliated and treated as nothing more than pieces of meat. Reluctantly, they did as they were told and took their clothes off, only keeping their underwear on. "Who said this job sucked? It's great, really, so long as we get beauties like these here," one of the Russian soldiers commented. "They're a bit skinny. We should feed them more," another one responded. "Darlings, why don't you turn around? Slowly," the first soldier instructed the 2 women. Taras could not watch this. He could feel everything the 2 women prisoners were feeling, wishing he could beat those perverted enemy soldiers to a pulp right here, right now. Unfortunately, there was little he could do right now. The soldiers were well armed, and he'd only get himself beaten up or killed if he did anything reckless. "Can I touch them?" Taras heard one of the soldiers asking another one. "Don't get too carried away, okay? the other replied sternly. Taras refused to look at what was happening, but he could hear everything. He could hear every demeaning word spoken by the Russian soldiers. Those women had nerves of steel to endure all of that without starting to cry or beg to be left alone. They simply put up with all the humiliation. Then, something else caught his attention. One of the other Russian soldiers was standing just some distance behind Taras and listening to the radio transmissions from another military unit. They were talking about their offensive towards Mykolaiv and how it wasn't going well. Taras heard everything and felt relieved. Roman joined back with him half a minute later, sitting right next to him. "You heard that?" Taras asked Roman in an almost whispering voice. "Heard what?" "What they were talking about on their radio. Mykolaiv is still fighting back. They've not managed to take it." "That's good news, right?" "Of course. We now know where we could go for help once we get out of here. If Mykolaiv is not in their control, it means we're not that far behind enemy lines." "That's true. But first we must find a way of getting out of here." "It will happen in time," Taras said confidently. "Did you find anything else that could be useful?" "Yeah," Roman said. He gazed around to check on every Russian soldier in the hallway. When he noticed that none of them were looking in his direction, he brought one of his feet up onto the seat and slightly lifted one of his trouser leggings for a brief second before hiding it again. Taras managed to see a big, sharp glass shard sticking slightly out of Roman's boot. "Okay, that's perfect. We'll need more objects like this. Let's try to find anything we can in the next few days." "I'll be on it like a hawk." Taras mustered the strength to look again at the scene involving the two women prisoners. It appeared that the soldiers were bored of ogling at the women, and both women were in the process of putting their clothes back on. One of the enemy soldiers then walked over to the doorway leading to the canteen and yelled at everyone remaining in it to hurry up eating because the dinner time was over and it was time to get back in a tiny room for the night. 23rd of March, Mykolaiv. Solomia came into the hospital early in the morning to start her shift. The days continued being identical to one another, and nothing appeared to be changing. Things only continued to get more difficult with each day as more wounded people were brought to the hospital. Solomia began to accept a scary possibility that the war might not end anytime soon, and a difficult time for her and her country could continue for many more months. She thought if only Timur was still alive, then at least going through this hell together with him would have been a little bit easier. But facing it all alone was unquestionably terrifying. As per her usual schedule of the last 2 weeks, she went straight to the ward where Zlata was to take over from another nurse. As Solomia entered the room, she saw 2 nurses sitting by the little girl's bed, and the girl was awake. Has she finally regained her senses? Solomia could not believe her eyes. For 2 weeks she kept coming to the hospital and looking after Zlata. Nothing was changing, and Zlata continued being unconscious. And now, finally, she was awake. "She's awake," Solomia repeated her thoughts. The 2 nurses turned in her direction. "She's literally woken up just a minute ago. It's like she felt your arrival or something," one of the nurses replied. The girl still looked rather poorly. She kept looking around in confusion, a very sad expression on her face. "What's happening to her?" "She's just having a little shock and trying to understand where she is." Solomia came closer to the girl's bed and sat next to it as well, along with the other 2 nurses. "Hey, how are you feeling?" she asked. Zlata did not respond, but she stopped looking around the place and focused her eyes on Solomia. Solomia leaned in closer and put her hand on Zlata's shoulder. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe here," she consoled the 10-year-old. "How did I get here?" Zlata asked all of a sudden. "Your home was hit, but you're safe now. Don't worry, okay?" Zlata's eyes then looked down and she saw herself in a hospital bed, and then she saw in horror that her left arm was gone. "Where is my arm? Where?" Fear overtook her and she began to cry uncontrollably, asking what happened to her arm repeatedly. Solomia came closer and put her arms around the poor girl, giving her a warm and gentle hug. She didn't say anything, as nothing she could say would make Zlata feel any better. One of the girl's arms was gone for good, and there was no denying that horrible fact. All she could do was show utmost care and love for the child to help her get through this trauma on an emotional level. The worst news was yet to come. The girl did not know yet that her parents were dead, and Solomia was still clueless as to how she would break those news to her. "We should get you something to eat. Are you hungry?" one of the other nurses asked Zlata. Zlata shook her head. Solomia could understand that the girl would have no appetite while seeing what happened to her. She needed time to calm down and for the emotions to subside a bit. "You should eat something," Solomia told her a few moments later. "You need the strength, dear." "I don't want to eat. I want to go home and see my mom and dad." "You need to stay here, dear, so that you can recover. We're all here for you, okay?" Zlata lowered her eyes. Tears continued falling down her cheeks. "Can I at least see mom and dad? Are they here?" Solomia briefly closed her eyes as she feared this moment would come. She did not know what to say and was at an absolute loss for words. "They're not here, dear," one of the other nurses said after a brief pause. "When will they come? Can I talk to them on the phone? Did they also get hurt?" There were so many questions. The little girl was understandably very concerned and wanted to be with her parents at this highly vulnerable for her time. The two other nurses in the room looked at each other and then at Solomia. None of them knew what to say and how to answer. "They got hurt, didn't they?" Zlata could tell by their reaction. "Sorry, dear," one of the nurses said without adding any more details. The girl still had no idea her parents were gone. How should they tell this to her? She was still physically weak. The news of her parents no longer being with her would destroy her and impact her recovery. Seeing that the nurses weren't telling her anything else, Zlata lay her upper body back down on the pillow and turned to the side as much as she could. She gazed at the bandaged up stump that was in place of her left arm, still trying hard to accept that as her new reality. Solomia and the other two nurses stepped away from the girl's bed into another corner of the room, discussing how to tell the girl about her parents. "We should wait a few days," Solomia suggested, making sure to keep her voice down. "We need to let her recover a bit more first." "Sooner or later she'll ask to see them again," another nurse mentioned. "We can't keep this a secret from her forever." "I know. We should give her at least a couple more days, one step at a time. Let her adjust to the shock. She's just realized she's in the hospital and is missing an arm." They agreed this was the best course of action for now. In the meantime, they needed to make sure that she continued making a physical recovery. Solomia was glad that Zlata had finally woken up from her coma. This was a huge step forward in the girl's recovery. She thought for a moment how it was the same with her own heart, how losing Timur sent her emotions into a state of coma, and now she was gradually recovering. She knew that just as the little girl's injuries, the scars in her own heart would always be there, and she would always miss her beloved, but perhaps she could at least move forward through life and not be crippled by the pain in her heart. 23rd of March, outskirts of Kiev. Maria and Alina kept going for over 2 days now. Maria had no idea where they were. She didn't have a map, and her phone was taken from her by the Russian soldiers when they first invaded her home. She didn't know this area at all. The only thought that gave her peace was that she and her daughter were reasonably far away from Bucha now, and the murderers that attacked their suburb would not find them anymore. It wasn't easy getting out of the occupied territory, as the Russian patrols could appear anywhere, and Maria still didn't know if she was out of the occupied territory or if she ventured even deeper into it. For that reason, their progress was slow, as they had to pick their timing correctly. Keeping to the forested area seemed safer, as they were unlikely to be discovered there, whilst going along the roads was too dangerous. What made things even worse for Maria was that she twisted her ankle half a day ago, and it was aching. Despite the pain and discomfort, she couldn't stop and carried on regardless. "Mom, where are we going?" Alina asked again. Maria lost count how many times her daughter asked that now. "To safety, dear. We need to find someone who will help us." "We've been going for ages." "Do you need a rest?" "Yes, please." They sat down on the grass by some trees. The area was somewhat secluded and surrounded by several trees and bushes. It was peaceful. The sun was setting on the horizon, and only a few beams of light were still coming through the gaps between the trees. Maria took a deep breath, feeling the smells of nature and appreciating the fact that she and her daughter were still alive after what they had been through. "Do you want to eat anything?" Maria asked her daughter. "Just a little bit," Alina replied. Maria searched in a backpack and got out one of the sandwiches that she made before they departed from Bucha. This was the last of the sandwiches, and now they only had some canned food left and a few waffle bars. She handed the sandwich to her daughter and hoped that they would find some help the next day. She was feeling very tired and shivery all of a sudden, so she zipped up her coat to try and stay warmer. Her eyes got heavy as she gazed at the evening sky. She leaned her head back against a tree to try and relax. Maybe we should just spend the night here and continue tomorrow. I can't go on right now.